to this last day of the first ever HELM Virtual Summit. I'm so pleased that we reached this point on our winding road. We've been wowed by lots of stimulating and engaging conversations. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling very excited, perhaps even overstimulated and intrigued to see how this journey will unfold and where next our winding road will lead us. So please stick with us today. Please do not go away. Our host for today is Professor Martin Oosthuizen. Martin is the Executive Director of SARUWA, which is the Southern African Regional Universities Association, an association that promotes regional collaboration in the higher education sector in SADC. He is also the Chief Executive Officer of the Cape Higher Education Consortium, which promotes collaboration between 4 universities in the Western Cape. Martin studied law and theology at the University of Stellenbosch, obtaining a doctorate in theology at UNISA in 1989. Following an academic career in theology, he moved into university management, serving as the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Teaching and Learning at Northwest University from 2011 to 2017. Before that, he served as the Senior Director of the Center for Planning and Institutional Development at the Nelson Mandela University in Port Elizabeth. This was from 2005 to 2011. Martin has been extensively involved in national and international institutional projects relating to standard setting, quality assurance, and qualifications design in the South African higher education sector. He is an international reviewer for the Oman Academic Accreditation Authority, and as an international reviewer has contributed to various institutional reviews for the Quality Assurance Agency in Scotland. Between 2011 and 2016, he served on the Council of Chief Executive Officers of the Open Education Resources Universities, an international organization that is committed to the development and use of open education resources to improve access and articulation into higher education. Welcome, Professor Martin Oosthuizen, and thank you very much for being the host for today. Thank you.
Good morning, Bernadette. Thank you very much for those words of welcome. I'd like to welcome all of the participants who are attending today's session. I think that we can all look forward to a very interesting session this morning. The focus of today's session is where we go from here. And I think what sets today apart is that today is adopting a wider lens and looking and placing the many challenges and discussions that we've had over the past few days within the wider lens of collaboration and taking higher education forward in the context of SADC and also the African continent. The Ideas platform for today focuses on leading for uncertainty. So we look forward to a very interesting discussion. And just in terms of the arrangements for today, you will have access to the chat function and a question and answer function on the Event Mobi platform. So it's my pleasure to introduce the facilitator for this morning, and this is Professor Francis Peterson, who is the Rector and the Vice-Chancellor of the University of the Free State, and he has been in this position since the 1st of April 2017. Before that, Francis served as the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, and also as the Dean of Engineering and the Built Environment at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. He has also had a distinguished career in the private sector and has served as the Executive Head of Strategy at Anglo American Platinum, and the Executive Vice President of Research and Development at Mintech. He obtained the degrees of B.Eng in Chemical Engineering, M.Eng, and then PhD Engineering at Stellenbosch University. He's a registered professional engineer with the Engineering Council of South Africa and has been a member of an international panel on sustainability for AngloGold Ashanti. Professor Peterson serves on various national and international technical, editorial, and advisory committees, is actively involved in and has consulted widely to the South African engineering and built environment industries. He's published over 150 technical papers and conference proceedings in international journals. So, colleagues, it gives me great pleasure to hand over now to Professor Francis Peterson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin, for that kind introduction. And also welcome to the audience this morning. It's been a fantastic just over 2 days, a lot of discussion. I think the Minister, the Honourable Minister, and also the CEO of USAf have really set the scene on the first day. And then the fantastic deliberations that happened on the last 2 days has just been great. This morning, we're going to try to distill through all of those input that also has happened in the last 2 days, with a focus primarily on, as Martin have said, leading the university in Africa, or a university in Africa, and leading for uncertainty. The Minister made the remark in his opening address about building strong and resilient public universities. And obviously in the context of complexity, in the context of uncertainty, and in the context of change. And we are blessed to have 3 panelists this morning that's going to take us through these deliberations, their thoughts, and about leading in uncertainty, or leading for uncertainty. And I want to introduce the first panelist, which is Professor Paul Salesa. And I'm going to ask Paul just to switch on his camera. Professor Paul Salesa, held distinguished academic and senior administrative positions in Canada and also in the United States for 25 years before taking his current position of Vice Chancellor and Professor of the Humanities and Social Sciences at the United States International University, Africa, in January 2016. In the early 2000s, he worked as a consultant for the Ford and MacArthur Foundations on their initiatives to revitalize higher education in Africa. His research project on African academic diaspora, conducted for the Carnegie Corporation of New York in the period 2011 to 2012, led to the establishment of the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program in 2013, that has to date sponsored nearly 400 African-born academics in the United States and Canada to work with dozens of universities in 6 African countries. He has published more than 300 journal articles, book chapters, reviews, short stories, and online essays, and authored or edited 27 books, several of which have won international awards. He currently serves as editor-in-chief of the Oxford Bibliographics Online in African Studies, and in 2015, he was a fellow at Harvard University and has held the position of honorary professor at the University of Cape Town since 2006, and also at the Nelson Mandela University since 2019. He is currently a member of the administrative board of the International Association of Universities, the advisory board of the Alliance for African Partnerships, as well as chair of the advisory council of the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program, chair of the board of trustees of the Kenya Education Network, and is a member of the University of the Ghana Council. Professor Paul Salesa, we're looking forward to your presentation. Welcome again. Over to you.
Thank you very much. It's been truly a pleasure participating in this conference for the last 3 days. I've learned a lot, and I particularly appreciate the opportunity to share this panel with two very dear friends of mine, Gulam, who I've known for many years, and Poleng, who also I've known for many years. And congratulations, Poleng, for becoming the Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of South Africa. We are all very proud of you. I would like to begin by sharing with you, if we can have the slide. Yeah, next. Next. Yeah, let's go to the next one and then come back to this one. Yeah, so I want to start with this quote. Of course, I'm not going to read it, about the challenges of university leadership. This gentleman, Chancellor William McRaven of the University of Texas, made a statement in 2018 that the toughest job in the nation, that is in the United States, is the one of an academic or health institution president. And of course, he was not a typical academic executive. He was a retired four-star admiral and Navy SEAL. And, he had been responsible for running the America's Special Operations Command. And this statement really garnered a lot of attention in the academic and, of course, popular media. And people said, what is so special about being the leader of a university? And, of course, the reasons are very clear, that university leaders answer to a very large number of constituencies, students, staff, faculty, you name it. And all of them have their own agendas, all of them are outspoken, and most of the time, they're very radically different views. If we can go back to the previous slide. So what I'd like to address in my presentation are the four things. One, the diversities of university leadership in terms of constituencies and demands. And secondly, in terms of roles and responsibilities. And certainly dealing with changing dynamics, including, of course, most recently, COVID-19. And then end my presentation by focusing on the need to sharpen our skills as university leaders. Next. Next. So in terms of constituencies, we all know that we have both internal and external constituencies that we have to deal with. Internally, students, faculty, staff, administrators, and of course, governing boards. And then externally, alumni, government, regulatory agencies, parents, partners, which include, of course, other universities, private sector, international and intergovernmental agencies, national and foreign governments, NGOs, and community organizations, and obviously donors and media. Next. The roles and the responsibilities of university leadership, certainly for the vice chancellor or president or rector, is to serve as the chief executive officer of the institution and the main liaison between the management and the university council, board of trustees, or board of regents. These terms, of course, vary. There are a number of responsibilities that university leaders have. One is, of course, leadership itself in terms of articulating the university's vision, mission, and values with internal and external stakeholders, promoting the university's distinctive traditions and strengths, and overseeing the development and implementation of long-range strategic plans and goals. Secondly, is administrative duties, overseeing the day-to-day running and effective operation of the university, from academic and student affairs, finance and human resources, to facilities and security that, of course, are directly overseen by deputy vice chancellors, vice presidents, or vice rectors. Next. And then there are three other responsibilities. Academics-related duties, supporting and enhancing the institution's academic mission and oversight of the quality of academic and support programs for what I call the four missions of the university: teaching and learning, research and scholarship, public service and engagement, innovation and entrepreneurship. And then, of course, development and public relations responsibilities, enhancing and diversifying institutional resources, relationships, and reputation through external engagements with multiple constituencies that I mentioned earlier. And then, of course, social and civic responsibilities, representing the institution in public affairs and promoting its engagement with external constituencies and partners for socio-economic impact and transformation. And the African University is particularly, regarded as an important developmental institution. And therefore, this is a very critical part. And we heard during the presentations that this responsibility, the outward responsibility, is one we will have to take seriously. Next. Now, there are a number of changing dynamics. And what I've done is to identify just a few of the key shifts, which of course affect how we run our institutions and whether we do so effectively or not. One is, of course, changing generations. You find that universities have a multiplicity of generations. Some of us are baby boomers, at least I can speak for myself. And then, of course, you have some faculty administrators who are Generation X. And some students, certainly graduate students, are they are among the so-called millennials. And then, of course, we are getting in our university Gen Z, and very soon Gen Alpha, and so on and so forth. And each of these have different expectations, learning styles, ways of interpersonal relationships, and so on and so forth. Then there is, of course, the issue of diversity and inclusion that we have heard a lot in this conference. Diversity in terms of gender, in terms of class, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of race, nationality, religion, disability, and the list goes on. And managing that is extremely important for effective organizational advancement. And then, of course, we all know about the technological transformations from the third industrial revolution. Now we are in the so-called fourth industrial revolution, which has been accelerated by COVID-19. And managing that, again, is something that we all have to be alert to. And then, of course, the digital disruptions. What is happening is that, education for a long time was measuring seat time. And much of the movement of students was cohort learning. Now, we are more, sort of measuring competences and so on. And the digital environment provides opportunities for personalized and competency-based learning. And there are, of course, a lot of changes that are taking place in the credentialing economy and the unbundling of the degree that we all have to pay attention to. And certainly the imperatives of lifelong learning are becoming more so. Next. A very key change, which the minister made reference to, is that, of course, jobs are changing, increasing pace of automation. The World Economic Forum produced a report last month, which talked about the future of jobs 2020. And it noted that 85 million jobs are likely to disappear by 2025, while there will be 97 million new jobs. In other words, there is a skilling revolution that is taking place. And below here is just a list from the report on the top 15 skills of 2025. And of course, these skill sets depend on the nature of the economy, but these can be regarded as being generic in most contexts. I'll not go through them. We all know about the need for these skills. And of course, the challenge for us is how we embed these skills in our teaching and learning programs. Next. Another important change is obviously the media landscape, from traditional media to the emergence of social media and the pervasive culture of surveillance. Now we all know reputations of individuals, of leaders of institutions, of entire institutions can be destroyed by a tweet, by social media. So, it's no longer just paying attention to what happens in the newspapers and on television, which are curated spaces, but also what a student might take of a vice chancellor, drinking maybe water and being interpreted as if you are inebriated. So all sorts of things are happening in the media landscape that as leaders, we have to pay attention to. And then, of course, internationalization. Old styles of internationalization, which involved the mobility of people and programs and policy mimicry. And then now we are going through deglobalization, as some people call it, or rather pressures against traditional globalization over the last 20 years, and COVID-19 is leading to other changes, including the emergence of virtual collaborations across the 4 missions of the university. And in a conference I was in together with Gulam a few days ago, the International Association of Universities celebrating its 70th anniversary, one of the presenters mentioned the fact that, in fact, the new environment might be one that encourages globalization and internationalization that empowers institutions in their regions. Certainly for us in the Global South and in Africa, this is particularly important because a lot of the internationalization has been one that has been characterized by asymmetries, asymmetrical exchanges, as well as, of course, hierarchies that are not necessarily productive for our institutions. And much of the partnerships have been what I call paternalistic partnerships, not partnerships that are based on mutuality of interests. Next. And then, of course, the final major issue we have to deal with is COVID-19 pandemic. It has devastated, as we all know, global economies, healthcare systems, and institutions, including universities. It has exposed widespread differences and inequalities in terms of national capacities to manage the crisis and its costs. It has also, of course, accelerated trends towards the digitalization of economic and social life and the need for digital skills. Next. Specifically for higher education, it has forced all of us to embrace distance teaching and learning using online platforms as never before. And it has revealed differentiated institutional resources, access to information technology and capabilities to transition to online teaching and learning. And it has underscored, I think, and all of us have experienced these challenges of access by faculty and students to digital technologies and broadband based on the social dynamics of class, location, gender, and age that we are all trying to grapple with. Next. So, there is a report that just came out a couple of weeks ago by EDUCAUSE in the US that publishes, stuff on IT issues in higher education. And this is a report on the 2021 top IT issues. And it foresees the emergence of what it calls alternative and overlapping futures involving 3 scenarios: restore, evolve, and transform. The restore scenario is a story of institutional survival focused on reclaiming the institution's pre-pandemic financial past, as well as, of course, operational and organizational past. The evolve scenario applies to institutions that will choose to incorporate the impact and lessons of the pandemic into their culture and vision. And then, of course, the transform scenario applies to those institutions planning to use the pandemic to launch or accelerate an institutional transformation agenda. In his opening remarks, Minister Blade Nzimande told us, and I thought the saying was absolutely brilliant, our universities must not bounce back, but bounce forward. Now, what does bouncing forward mean in terms of skills for university leadership? I would like to close with that. Next. There are a number of skills, and we all, of course, read about skills, and we have heard a lot about leadership skills in this conference. I would like to underscore that it's really a question of sharpening existing skills. The group called Academic Search, an American executive search company, notes that the multi-pronged health, economic, and financial crisis of COVID-19, coming on top of other crises and contexts that we were dealing with before, require the sharpening of 10 skills among university leaders, from administrators to board members. So the first one is financial acuity. In addition to managing complex institutional budgets, which we're used to, university leaders need to develop ability to manage reductions in staffing, in some cases, programs, and space. Secondly, cultural competence. University leaders must go beyond making statements on valuing diversity and inclusion, which we are all very good at. And our mission statements always say we are diverse, we believe in diversity and inclusion, to exhibiting deeper awareness of systemic injustice, inequality, and privilege, and show boundless compassion and commitment to promoting an inclusive institution. Next. There is also a need, obviously, for technological deftness. It's no longer enough for university leaders to be comfortable in using emerging technologies, but to exhibit, model, and promote institutional technological savviness and competence, and develop analytics expertise to promote data-driven decision-making. While, of course, technology has its surveillance aspects, which are, can be quite ugly, it also has, productive elements in terms of data analytics that can help us intervene and promote student success in ways that were not possible before. And then, of course, there is crisis management. And COVID-19 is crisis par excellence. In addition to preparing for natural and security threats, which some of us have had to do, leaders have to manage physical and mental health crisis, emergency preparedness, and business continuity, and leading in times of uncertainty, as Professor Peterson indicated in his introductory remarks, and as we've been discussing in this conference. And then, of course, entrepreneurial mindset. More than ever, universities need leaders who are calculated risk takers, innovative entrepreneurs, and effective in promoting the university's mission as they create beneficial external partnerships and revenue generation initiatives. As, of course, subventions from the state, get strained because of multiple demands, certainly those thrown by COVID-19. Next. And then, of course, political savviness. University leaders are increasingly required to work in uncertain and politically polarized times at national, regional, and global levels that require them to pursue and promote advocacy and institutional discourse that is calm, informed, and respectful. And, of course, empathy and respect. We heard a lot about this. More than ever, as mental stress and financial insecurity rise among university constituencies, including and especially among our students, leaders are expected to demonstrate empathy and respect for all their internal constituencies and reveal their humanity, even in decision-making. And then, of course, there is multi-genre communication skills. Besides, of course, strong written and verbal communication skills, leaders are now increasingly expected to provide efficient, timely, clear, and persuasive messages and stories to diverse constituencies using multiple platforms, including social media. Some of us from the BBC generation, born before computers, this is, of course, fairly taxing, but we have no choice but to make sure that we become a lot more savvy. Next. And then finally, there are these two areas that we have to sharpen our skills. High emotional intelligence. Besides the ability to demonstrate confidence and empathy, and of course, leaders are usually judged on that, leaders are now more and more expected to demonstrate self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, and social skills, rather than being egotistic, impulsive, and prone to bullying and micromanagement. And finally, agility. In addition to having well-established professional knowledge and experience, success increasingly depends on a leader's ability to be flexible in the face of many changes, have the capacity to learn and assume new and more responsibilities, and show fortitude and flappability and moral compass. Next. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Salesa. Wonderful presentation. Give us a lot of food for thought. Just to pick up some of the things that you've mentioned that we will have to take forward in our discussion. You were referring about the broad range of constituencies that vice chancellors or presidents or rectors had to engage, and I think that always have been there. But the complexity, the fact that there's now more different expectation from these broad stakeholders and constituencies. There's also different modes of communication that increase the frequency of those. So the way in which we have to engage with those constituencies has become a little bit more complex. And I think that's something that we could come back to. The one, I actually like the word that you use, skills revolution, and in engaging with the broader economy, people, when they talk about the future world of work, they talk about the workplace itself that have changed. They talked about the work itself in the workplace that have changed. And then they talked about the skill sets that are required. So this is how industry, private sector, and business are approaching this future work of work. But the skill revolution is something fantastic. And then I think the other three areas, which for me is something that we need to unpack in our deliberations, is the social media, more the post-truth type of environment that is being created through that. The whole issue of internationalization, how that is changed. And there is a school of thought that, is there a tension between globalization and localization, and how does that play out? And then finally, your sort of input in terms of sharpening the leadership skills of leaders of higher education institutions. What competencies is required, the financial and political savviness, the entrepreneurial thinking, and the ability to be agile, and obviously the whole issue of empathy, of humbleness, which also came through in some of the. So those were some of the things, Professor Salesa, that I picked out of your presentation that we surely would come back to. So thank you very much, Professor Salesa. I'm going to ask you maybe just to switch off your video and ask Professor Ghulam Muhammad Bhai to switch on his video. And while he's doing that, I'll introduce him to the audience. Ghulam Muhammad Bhai, who originates from Mauritius, did his undergraduate and postgraduate studies in civil engineering at the University of Manchester in the UK, and later his postdoctoral research at the University of California, Berkeley. He joined the University of Mauritius in 1972 and served as its vice-chancellor from 1995 to 2005. He was Secretary General of the Association of African Universities, President of the International Association of Universities, and a member and Vice Chair of the Governing Council of the United Nations University. He is the recipient of several honorary doctorates and awards. Muhammad Bhai operates as an independent consultant in higher education with special interest in Africa. He's currently the chair of the Consultative Advisory Group of the World Bank PASSET project. He's also a member of the Regional Steering Committee of the World Bank's project on African Centers of Excellence for Eastern and Southern Africa, the Council of the Mauritius Academy of Science and Technology, and he's also a member of the board of the University World News Africa. He is also honorary advisor to the Commonwealth of Learning. Professor Ghulam Muhammad Bhai, welcome, and we're looking forward to your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Peterson, for this introduction. Good morning to one and all on this platform. Greetings from Mauritius, and my special greetings go to my two fellow panelists, Paul, of course, and Professor Poulenc. Professor Poulenc, Paul, thank you for this very, very stimulating presentation. And Professor Poulenc, congratulations on your appointment, and welcome to one of the toughest jobs on the planet, as mentioned by Paul. So what I propose to do is to really to look at my presentation will be framed in the context of how to lead for uncertainty as a result of disruptions. And my emphasis will be on universities in sub-Saharan Africa. This is the area I know best. And some of the things that I would say may not be entirely applicable to the situation in South Africa. In my view, COVID-19 has created disruptions and caused uncertainties in 4 major areas, which universities leaders in Africa will have to address. And these 4 areas are: first, teaching and learning; second, research; third, institutional financing; and fourth, graduate employment. Let me address the first issue of teaching and learning. As we know, after the lockdown in March 2020 in most African countries, African higher education institutions resorted to online teaching to complete their programs. But not all institutions were prepared to do this. In April 2020, a quick survey was carried out by the International Association of Universities and the Association of African Universities, 2 surveys which were carried out completely independently and covered, I think, about 175 universities. And the 2 surveys showed that roughly 65 to 70% of African universities were unprepared to move to online teaching, but they felt compelled to do so. Also, not all African countries have adequate ICT infrastructure and broadband access to enable quality online teaching and learning. And some institutions, of course, are better equipped and experienced in online delivery than others, even if they happen to be in the same country. Regarding students, we know that some students in rural areas may not have access to internet, or if they do, it may be too expensive. And some students from poorer families may not have a desktop or laptop for working from home. Generally, when everything went online, students were unfamiliar with using online material. Preliminary survey data show that overall, there is lots of views there, but overall, students are dissatisfied with extensive online teaching, and I emphasize on the word extensive. Faculty also have not been trained to deliver courses remotely or online, and the older ones, in fact, show very little interest in doing so. And we know that in African universities, most of them have a very large proportion of old faculty. The question that arises then is, should universities aim to fully migrate to online teaching and learning, as has been suggested? Is that possible or even desirable? Research is showing that unprepared online teaching has serious impact on quality, and that the best approach is to use blended learning, that is a mixture of online teaching and face-to-face teaching. But what proportion of programs should be online? How do universities overcome the digital divide and inequity among the students? And perhaps a more fundamental question is, are African universities jumping too fast into digitalization of their teaching and learning without adequate preparation and without properly evaluating all the consequences? Let me turn to the second area now after teaching and learning, and this is research. We know that research output from Africa is very poor. And to improve research output, universities have been participating in a plethora of research projects initiated at the national, regional, and continental level. The emphasis has been on doctoral training, and rightly so, because that has been the weakness in African higher education. And the research topics have usually been selected in priority areas for Africa's development. And in many cases, they've been guided by the priority areas laid out by the African Union Commission. All indicators were showing positive outcome of the efforts, and then came COVID-19 and activities started to slow down. In May 2020, a survey of just over 500 academics and researchers was undertaken by Mawazo Institute. This is a non-profit research institute in Kenya. And it showed that 73% of those academics and researchers surveyed had suspended their field and laboratory work, which they believed would seriously impact the duration and outcome of their research. But it is PhD programs in African higher education institutions that are very likely to suffer the most. And this directly concerns South Africa, because we know that South Africa trains a large number of PhDs from other African countries. And in many cases, these may well have come to a halt. There are other doctoral training programs, and many of these rely on international partnerships. And again, because of COVID-19, they would equally suffer. Funding of research is also and will be a major challenge. The bulk of research projects in Africa are currently funded by Europe, the World Bank, and agencies and foundations in the United States. But many Western countries are facing recession and have to support their own higher education institutions. Will they continue to provide the same degree of research funding to Africa? This is something that we have to bear in mind and leaders have to bear in mind. At national level, most universities might face budget cuts for research, and national research funds may also be curtailed. Some time back, I read that the National Research Foundation in South Africa is planning to reduce its research funding to South African higher education. I hope it doesn't go ahead with it, but that was the news that I had. But inevitably, this is a sort of situation I think universities in Africa will face. So how do university leaders then mitigate the disruption and ongoing research and doctoral training and ensure availability of adequate research funds in the future? A major challenge for university leaders. My third issue was institutional financing. The first one was teaching and learning, the second one was research, and the third one is institutional financing. Financing of public higher education institutions in Africa has always been a major challenge. Public institutions. Government grants have rarely matched increasing student enrollment, and this has resulted in institutional massification and poor quality. Student fees were introduced to bring some sort of relief, but these are now under question. We know the movement fees must fall in South Africa, and in my own country, Mauritius, in 2019, government decided to remove all undergraduate fees in public higher education institutions, and the consequences of this have yet to be felt in future. Many income-generating measures have been tried by institutions, so much variety there. For example, running a supermarket or even a funeral parlor. But really, they have not made a significant dent on providing sufficient funding to the institution. With COVID-19, there is a real danger that government grants to higher education institutions will be reduced. The question is, by how much? And similarly, how then will higher education institutions cope because of this reduced funding? But COVID-19 will perhaps have a more significant impact on private higher education institutions, which are heavily dependent on student fees to cover their operational costs. I know, and I got this from the minister's speech at the opening ceremony, that private higher education institutions are not that many in South Africa. But believe me, in sub-Saharan Africa, they play an extremely important role. In fact, there are many, many more private higher education institutions in African countries, in sub-Saharan Africa, than public ones. Although one should say that the student enrollment in private institutions is somewhat less than in public institutions. So we need to bear in mind the role played by private higher education institutions. With students not enrolling in private institutions because of high fees, and with international students not being able to enroll because of travel restrictions, how will private higher education institutions survive? And the result could well be that several of them, less resilient, may close down. And what then would be the consequence of this on development in African countries, which rely so much on higher education? My fourth and last issue is graduate employment. Even before the pandemic, African countries were experiencing the challenge of graduate unemployment. I think the figure in South Africa, if I'm right, is something of the order of 34%. In some countries, it can be much higher than that. From feedback received from employers, a major cause of unemployment is the lack of soft skills in the graduates. But with the projected wide use of online teaching, the question arises, will this not exacerbate the situation because most of the teaching is being done online? Currently, many private sector employers are being forced to lay off staff because of downsizing and even closures. We've had many of these in Mauritius, and graduates will find it harder to find jobs. What then will be the future employment market for graduates? What will it look like in the years ahead, considering that student enrollment must continue to increase to catch up with other world regions? Tertiary education enrollment in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa at the moment is of the order of 10 to 11%, with of course significant variations among countries. Whereas for other regions, the figure is more developing countries regions, the figure is more about 20 to 25 to 30%. So we have a long way to go. We cannot stop enrolling students. But what if by enrolling more students, they end up as unemployed graduates? Should higher education institutions place greater emphasis on entrepreneurship? How can that be done? Some countries have gone through the way of introducing modules of entrepreneurship in all their programs, but honestly, it has had very little impact. That is not the way one introduces entrepreneurship among the students. How does one establish closer linkages with private sector? Because this is what we're told is the best way to move forward. Can we use sandwich training attachments or credentials for shorter study periods? And this was touched on by Paul just now in his presentation. There's a very interesting example from India, which of course, as you know, faces a very serious issue of graduate unemployment. In their latest education planning document released this year, it proposes that university degrees from public institutions should have a credential at the end of each year. For example, a certificate at the end of the first year of the degree, a diploma at the second year, and then finally a degree award at the end of the third year, with the student being able to move out, work, do whatever it is appropriate in industry, in the private sector, even in the public sector, before he or she comes back to the university. An interesting proposal, not very easy to implement, I'm sure, especially from the curriculum point of view, but one that I think Africa may need to start thinking about and not wait for doing all the 3 years with large failures perhaps at the end and not finding, those who do succeed, not finding a job. What is clear is that university leaders must now seriously pay attention to graduate unemployment. There were days about a decade ago, I think, when university leaders were saying, our job is training our students and making sure that we give them the best quality of education. Their responsibility is then to find a job. Those days are gone. But because let's not forget that large graduate unemployment may have serious social repercussion on the country. Apart from the 4 areas that I have mentioned, there are other areas that will also require attention. For example, enforcing sanitary requirements on campus. How do you do this with thousands of students and hundreds of staff? And yes, a vaccine is in sight. Yes, soon we hope COVID-19 will be, behind us. But let's not forget that other pandemic will come. Different waves may be coming. The vaccine may not be for tomorrow as far as Africa is concerned. So we mustn't forget about the challenge of COVID-19 onto our situation and the impact it has on higher education at the moment. In conclusion, let me say that leading an African university is never easy, even at best of times. Having to cope with so many disruptions and to plan with so many areas of uncertainty will be truly challenging. Here are 2 suggestions that perhaps could help. The first one is that universities in Africa must conduct regular surveys and collect and analyze data to assist in planning for disruption and uncertainty. Most of the surveys that have been carried out recently seem to be showing that African universities are notorious for not keeping reliable data. There was a couple of World Bank programs that could not go ahead simply because reliable data on universities were not available. Simple things as to students enrolled, proportion of female students and so on, what programs they're running and so on. It is high time for universities now to start collecting data, analyze data, and use this data for planning. The second suggestion that it is vital for African universities to collaborate and share their experiences at all levels. And the relevant platforms where they can do this exist. They exist at national level. For example, University of South Africa is a typical example. They exist at sub-regional level. Sarua is one example. The Inter-University Council for East Africa is another example. And it exists at continental level. For example, the Association of African Universities. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Ghulam, and for that interesting presentation. I think the four areas that you lifted out there, the teaching and learning, specifically the one on the digital inequality, that's an area that one need to unpack a little bit more in the context of online or remote teaching and learning. Then in research, you're talking about funding and obviously the potential strain on funding for research, and it probably also dovetails very well with Professor Selesa's presentation in terms of internationalization. I think if funding is forthcoming from the global north, so to speak, towards the African continent, maybe internationalization and a relook on internationalization could shape some of the ways in which we look at split scholarships, split degrees, joint projects, and introduce the global south content within such curricula, and therefore also optimize funding. But that's something that I would like to come back to later on. You spot on in terms of the challenges in relation to institutional finances. That is going to be a challenge, and we need to sort of freshly unpack how one would go about to do that. But I think the whole issue of collaboration and in fact institutional finances might also come to the point that you talk about graduate employability and graduate employment. Because for me, it is about bringing the economy much more closer onto our campuses. So how do you bring business, private sector, commerce, government, NGOs closer to the sector, and maybe try to analyze the construction of industrial advisory boards on each of our academic programs or faculties to bring that sector onto our campus, talking to the curriculum, talking about infusing mentorship if you have got those people on your campus. And I said on your campus doesn't mean that they're there full time, but there's the relationship is much more closer with that sector, and therefore introduce the sort of graduateness for employability already into your curriculum, but not by the academic, but by the academic and the representative from the private sector and industry. And that for me is probably something that I need to unpack. In South Africa, our graduate unemployment is much lower. I haven't got the full number in front of me, but I think it's in the order of about 8 to 9%. So we, the fact that you have a tertiary qualification, and specifically even a postgraduate qualification, that also helps a bit comparing to your largest number that you quoted of about over 30%. But obviously that's a challenge on our continent, and we need to look at that. But those are things that we could come back again. But Professor Ghulam Muhammad Bai, thank you very much for setting that scene, and we will certainly come back to that. I'm going to ask you to perhaps switch off your video, and I'm going to ask Professor Puleng Lenkabula to switch on her video. While I'm introducing her, Professor Puleng Lenkabula is a South African and a feminist ethicist. She's currently working as a Deputy Vice-Chancellor. In fact, she's my colleague at the University of the Free State, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Institutional Change, Student Affairs and Community Engagement. And we have heard that she would be, and I also would like to congratulate her again, would be the Vice-Chancellor and Principal Designate, or she is the Vice-Chancellor and Principal Designate for the University of South Africa. Now, Professor Puleng Lenkabula holds a doctorate in ethics, theology and philosophy with specialization in social ethics from the University of South Africa. Her doctoral study was on bioprospecting and intellectual property rights on African plant commons and knowledge. That's a new form of colonization viewed from an ethical perspective. She also has a master's degree with specialization in social ethics from the St. Andrew College at the University of Saskatoon in Canada, and she obtained that in 1997. Her junior degree was a Bachelor of Education with 3 majors in English, theology, and education, and that was conferred by the National University of Lesotho. So Puleng's strength lies in her ability to transverse disciplinary parameters, research, and stakeholder cultivation and development. She's a board member of local and international ecumenical and academic formations. She has also engaged with high impact sectors, cooperation on corporate citizenship, on governance and social justice. And in order to ensure that her academic and intellectual work are not limited to local context only, but has interface with other universities, including as a visiting scholar at Witwatersrand, Sweden, Columbia University Center for African Studies, and the University of Toronto, amongst others. Professor Puleng Lenkabula, we're looking forward to your presentation, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Peterson, who is my boss, and I hope I will not disappoint you. I'm trying to load my presentation. I'm not certain whether it's already in the system. Can you see it?
No, it's not there yet, Puleng. Do you go to the share screen option?
Oh, I should. Yes.
And then it should actually there should be the files that you have loaded. That should be in one of the files, and you just click on that.
Can I go on with my presentation and probably send the PowerPoint later?
Yeah, no, you can do that. That's fine. Thank you.
That's fine. Yeah, because I've sent it to Bridget, and yes, thank you very much, Chair. I thought I would like to introduce to first thank the panelists, the esteemed panelists who have been mentors or I've looked up to in the varied scholarly work that they produce, but also in their participation within the Council for the Development of Social Sciences Research in Africa, Professor Zeleza in particular, and Professor Ghulam for the work that he does on higher education, including the inventions around student-centric participation. So I'm truly appreciative, but also to you, Chair, as a mentor, a boss, and somebody whom I work really well with and whose leadership epitomizes some of the issues we are presenting here in. I thought I would like to think around African universities, the leadership systems and the disruptions and changes that have occurred in the histories, in the context, in the origins, histories, context, fissures, and aspirations of Africa's universities. I then thought if we look at the origins of universities, Africa's universities in Africa, we have those that have been initiated within the Africa context, whose mission or missional mandate was actually aligned with the development of character or character formation, resourcing the socio-religious and relational aspects, archiving and documenting the lived experiences within the context, and even started by women, such as the university as FERS. But we also have universities that were instituted as part of the colonial project, but also in the post-colonial era. And it is my contention in this presentation that universities at all epochs have dealt with changing systems or dynamics, whether political, socio-religious, or in the economics. In particular, I'm of the view that the post-colonial university in particular has wrestled with the meaning of what it is, its own ontology, its task, its roles, its infrastructures, as well as the core mandates that it has to focus on. And I want to say the philosophical foundations of the debate and discourses around how universities in Africa have envisioned themselves, have understood their missional mandate, and assessed it and dealt with the contradictions is particularly clear in the works of Professor Zeleza himself, but among others, Adebayo Ologoshi, Amina Mama, Mahmoud Mamdani, Sabelo Gacheni Ndlovu, Mashupe Masirumule, Pumla Kola, and many others. And for me, this implies that if we understand the context of university systems in Africa as both indigenous, endogenous, but also as that which has had to wrestle with the colonial project, then it seems to me that the core mandate of university must be the first site of engagement and deliberative process if we are to lead the changes that ought to happen. And I'm of the view that precisely because of these diversities of origins, of the context of existence and experience, of the structures and prioritizations of curriculum, pedagogies, and its impact in the socio-economic, social systems, it is important to state that. I'm also thinking that precisely because universities have served as the fulcrum of ideation, the tendency has been for African universities to prioritize theory and not necessarily prioritize inventions, the translation of theories into praxis or practical inventions that could serve in the solutions or in the quest for solutions of exigencies that universities in Africa themselves wrestle with. And I say this with all humility, understanding, for instance, that our university systems, whilst they resource the different sectors, the general tendency has been that remote participation and not necessarily being woven into the fabric of these institutions. And that might be one of the areas of leadership that we identify as an important locus. And Paulo Freire, for instance, alongside with Messi Odioye and Steve Biko, speak about this primacy of ontology, or this primacy of freedom, of ensuring that knowledge systems that are produced within the university are not just at the ideation level, but they promote freedom, they assert, they humanize, they speak about ecologies and ensure that that happens. And Maluleke and Ackerman raises this even in more terse ways. Finally, not finally, but for this particular section, if then the universities are the locus of knowledge construction that is relevant and that allows thinking and rethinking around enrichment of democracies, about freedom, around shaping the present, the future, and ensuring that we actively participate. What might be the changing dynamics that influence the decisions towards such leadership? I think, for instance, the modes of operations, financing, and economic structures require some reflections from those of us who lead universities, particularly because ideas around knowledge are no longer the sites of universities. For instance, if we were to think around the whole questions of digital knowledge systems, we realize that private companies are already establishing their own sites of training and leadership and knowledge, and sometimes not even engaging universities. And it is my contention that this particular evolution, where private corporations institute their own learning centers, is an invitation for us to rethink collaborative systems with those, lest we become invalid in our own quest for leadership in the knowledge arena. The second part that I think has already been attested to, especially in the presentations of Professor Ghulam, in the summary of Professor Francis, but also Professor Zeleza and the Minister of Higher Education, is a whole notion of massification of higher education and the pedagogies that are relevant in that, and the whole notion of digitalization as a lever, but also itself a knowledge arena that requires improving. I'm of the view that massification is an important arena if we are to look at the majority of Africans that wallow in the margins because of unemployment, underemployment, inequality, or nominal access to resources that enable them to live meaningfully and to participate in creating own employment. In the context of South Africa, for instance, Statistics South Africa tells us that 8 million youth and young adults below 35 are unemployed. 3 million of them are tired of even looking for employment. That implies that we must be agile, analytical, in order to ensure that we respond to these questions. The South African example is just but one example. However, if you take the Mauritian example around the employment statistic, that tells you that this is an important priority for Africa's universities. The issues around the 4.0 industrialization or the fourth industrial revolution have already been reflected on, and therefore I'll not dwell on them. However, I think the questions of advocacy for curriculum transformation, for institutional cultures that promote inclusivity, that ensure universal access without success, that ensures that the humanizing idea around knowledge, around people living with disabilities or gender questions, as well as lesbian, bisexual, gay, transsexual, queer, intersex, asexual. Those notions of pluriversality become important areas of ensuring that we undermine what this young activist, Malaika Mahlatsi, calls creating that. She argues that we have created universities that have become corridors of violence, which usurp the dignity and being of youth and young adult, instead of becoming the sites of development, excitement about knowledge, and therefore try to ensure that we put such institutional cultures that are enabling, that are humanizing, but that also empower students and staff to invent and to participate as citizens within our society. I'm of the view that the issues around the fees must fall, the roads must fall, the insourcing of cleaning staff, security are quite important, have already been reflected on, as those aspects that ask us on those historical exclusions or dissonances that we have to grapple with. But issues of African languages, I think this is where sometimes we politicize this issue around its economics, but we never really look about its beneficial value in terms of research, inventions. And when one looks at countries like Korea, it may be prudent for us to begin to rethink what is the beneficial value as leaders in higher education of Africa's language systems in ensuring that higher education is progressive, it's humanizing, and it's ecologically friendly. I understand that in terms of the higher education trends, issues of democratization of knowledge, the massive increase in availability of online, mass expansion in access are quite important issues that we have to be attendant to, including the markets of fundings, why universities will, these issues around financial aid for students in order to compete with their global contemporaries are quite urgent issues for us to begin to develop partnerships with the government, states, private sector, and also our relationships with the global south as they could be with the global north. I think the idea of global mobility due to globalization, internationalization, world systems, but also the idea of the world in which we live together and coexist is quite an important one for current leaders of African universities. In the main, I think collaboration is quite important. I think we need to reclaim and secure the future through knowledge, through collaborative activities. But we also need the primacy of forming ontologies and epistemic freedom not to be issues that students or staff or even stakeholders have to fight for, but which we as the leadership must assert as important imperatives for the university systems. I'm of the view that great leadership for Africa's universities will be attendant to the activities beyond colonialities and beyond which will create and bridge asymmetries through engaged scholarship. And often this mission of engaged scholarship is often negated. It has not been as vogue as research and teaching and learning. And I think this is quite important. Finally, I'm of the view that promoting humanizing pedagogies, curriculum, digital ethics, given the fourth industrial revolution, will be very integral to curbing and contending with the disruptions, changes, and contradictions, transforming and promoting social capital, cohesion, and social justice, and shaping concrete solutions and inventive futures are quite important. I finally would like to say, I want to problematize the notions of disruptions. In the new techno speak, the notion of disruption is understood as something which is quite vogue and normative. But I'm of the view that we should problematize it to understand how disruptions enable recreation of strong communities, strong societies, strong institutions that enable and respond to the grand challenges of our times, such as climatic changes, environmental concerns, and just the idea of billion of people who are at the bottom and 26 billionaires who are able to shape how states, institutions, private and public organize themselves. So it means for me the implications of leadership are balancing the present demands with the future, diversification of leadership according to gender, disabilities, abilities, disciplinary and multidisciplinary issues, and also places of origin. It means agility, resilience, inter-institutional and multi-sectoral collaboration, but it also means promoting knowledge not just as a construction, as a function of constructed edifice, but as reflexivity, research, inventions, civilization, and contending with the past, the present, and aspired future in ways that the continuous processes of creation, reinvention, rethinking, thinking itself, as well as the knowledge systems, and anticipating the global grand challenges and resource society. COVID-19, for instance, arrested the academic project. Universities themselves were not even more agile than other institutions. And it means to us that there was a gap that was demonstrated around how we've organized ourselves as universities, not only in Africa, but globally, and have then had to move into the digital arena in order to interface. And we may want as leaders to reflect on what it means to be lagging behind and why it would be important to move a little bit more faster and in an agile, resilient, and resourceful manner. And finally, I think to improve our leadership, we have to improve our cooperative governance, our leadership systems, our administrative processes in ways that are visionary, agile, adaptable, and knowledgeable. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Professor Lenkabula, for providing that specific angle into our discussion. I think the things that stood out for me was about the university systems in Africa that actually is grappling or wrestling with the colonial project and how we actually go about to do that. It probably talked a little bit about pedagogies, curriculum, how do we engage and interface with knowledge. And talking about knowledge, what you also have indicated is that the universities are not the only sites or the custodian of knowledge. I think we always in the past said if you want to engage with knowledge, you go to the university, and even if the university is on a hill, is even better. But there are various other knowledge systems that interfaces with universities, and to what extent do we bring them in a way to complement and supplement what we already have. And you refer to knowledge in the broader economy, but obviously also knowledge in communities, which we often not optimally utilize. And that probably brought me to the point that you also mentioned about engaged scholarship. How do we engage with other sectors of our constituencies that is defined as the larger community, and how do we engage it in a meaningful way to optimize the university in Africa? And the one area that is probably not always have such a major focus is the whole issue of African languages, and to what extent do we looking at the beneficial value that one can utilize African languages in the broader context of the academic project, and also in the scholars and the new citizens that we are producing from our universities. So I think it brought a different perspective in the panel, but surely it helps us to unpack what is the sort of uncertainty that we have to lead ourselves into. I'm now going to ask that all of my other two panelists also switch on their camera, so that we can all see them, because I want to go into a discussion mode now, and there are a couple of areas that I want to pick on. There is the area of institutional finances, because that is uncertain, and maybe some thoughts around institutional finances as a broader area that I just would like us to unpack a bit. Then there's the issue of the skills revolution. To what extent do we educate and train graduates that go out there in the economy, and how do we do that, and how should universities of the future on the African continent, how they could help us think through this. So that's the second area. The third area is about pulling the area that you talked about, the knowledge, the pedagogy, the curriculum, and how, you know, we spend quite a lot of time coming out of which is also probably a disruption, fees must fall and notes must fall, where the issues of decolonization, insourcing, gender-based violence, transformation, you know, those key areas came out, and a lot of emphasis was put on a reflection towards decolonization. But if we talk about knowledge and pedagogy and the curriculum in the broader sense, what is it what we should be engaging ourselves with and thinking, and to a certain extent, both Ghulam and Paul talk about credentialing, and to what extent is that incorporated. So that probably is the third area. And then there was a question specifically probably to you, Professor Ghulam, on the chat box that I picked up. You mentioned about reliable data on the continent, and the question is really, how do we harness that data in a collaborative way? How can we learn from one another and not be so competitive? And I actually want to probably, to all three of you, would like to take that question a little bit further and say, in the context of digital inequality, where connectivity and electricity is a challenge on the continent, how do we, as institutions of higher learning, as universities, start to pull in a collaborative way efforts together to engage with the telecoms, the multinational telecoms, telecommunication companies, the respective governments, and probably also the philanthropic organizations, because there's really a role that we need to play, but it can only happen in a collaborative way. So that's really I think some of the questions that came through. So just to make sure that we start off, because I've just sort of mentioned the highlights, maybe we should start off with the institutional finances. And I don't know whether, Paul, you would like to kick off and then we can go through. Puleng, I'm going to probably ask you when your mic is still off. You could probably leave it off if you want to for now. But if you talk, if you can just put that on. All right. So Paul or Gulam or even Puleng, if there's anything that you would like to indicate, but let me start with Paul on the institutional finances one.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a question that keeps all of us awake at night. And we all know that institutional finances really come from 5 sources. One is tuition. And of course, tuition is now depressed because of the economic conditions. A lot of parents have lost jobs, and therefore the ability to pay for students is fairly limited because of that. We have seen in our own institution a sharp drop in student enrollments and therefore in tuition, which is forcing us to try to balance the books in ways that we have not had to deal with. The second source, of course, is government subventions, and those are also under enormous stress. What Gulam talked about earlier. And then the third is donors, donations. Unfortunately, with a few exceptions, and South Africa perhaps might be one of the exceptions, and even for South Africa, certain universities more than others, the amount of philanthropy that comes to universities is extremely limited. In fact, almost non-existent in some contexts. For the last 5 years that I've been Vice Chancellor, I've not gone too far in trying to generate donations from the high net worth individuals. Kenya and Nairobi is one of those places, is I think number 4, number 5 in Africa, in terms of as a place of high net worth individuals or these multimillionaires. But they find it easier to give money to Harvard and Oxford and Sorbonne than to their own institutions on the continent. And there are all sorts of complicated reasons for that, but part of it is the colonial mentality. And then the fourth source is loans. And loans, of course, are very dangerous for institutions that are not profit-making and so on. And sometimes you're finding that a lot of financial agencies and are trying to enter the higher education space in terms of PPPs, to provide the building of hostels and so on and so forth. But some of the terms that are presented, and sometimes because universities are so broke, we jump without understanding how to do that effectively. And you end up with, loans that you really can't service, and it leads to all sorts of challenges. And then finally is marketing of institutional resources. Gulam mentioned the fact that some investors, and I know quite a few here in Kenya, have established shops and even mortuaries and butcheries and all sorts of things, hotels, to make money. And frankly, you don't make a lot of money in the end, and you get yourself involved in activities that you have no expertise. What is perhaps more productive consultancies in which you're marketing institutional resources in terms of the research capabilities of your faculty and providing some of these, executive programs that are in demand by industry and the public sector and so on. So the issue of finances is a very serious one, and I think it's become worse because of COVID-19. And all of us have to begin really thinking afresh. How do we, handle this issue? Some of the arguments, and I'll close with that, that some of us have been making in the Kenyan context, is that student aid needs to be need-based. The current program is one in which it's merit-based. So you get, grade A, B, whatever, and then you get government subvention. And the people who are getting that subvention are not necessarily the ones who need it most, because, they tend to also come from, high-income families, and therefore they can get the kind of tutoring that is necessary for them to pass, quote-unquote, exams in a certain way. And I think we need to start focusing a lot more on need-based and fully fund them. In Kenya, for example, the funding of public publicly sponsored students in universities, the amount has not changed since 1989. That is 30 years ago. There is no service, there is no product in Kenya that costs 1990 prices. So we need to think very seriously the funding models by government, but also by the universities in terms of how do we calibrate tuition in such a way that the needy students have access in ways that meets the fact that they come from disadvantaged economic communities.
Thank you very much, Paul. I don't know whether Gulam, do you want to come in, and I'll come to Buleng?
Yes, thank you, Francis. I think Paul has nicely covered the main issues. I think when you boil it down, as far as financing of higher education institutions is concerned, to me there are only two main sources. For public institutions, it would be government grants. For private institutions, it would be foundations or whatever it may be. And then student fees. And I think there's no getting away from it. Everything else that has been tried has really not really made that much difference. I do agree, as Paul mentioned, that perhaps marketing your services, marketing your, renting your premises, running conferences, doing this and that does help a little bit. I think at University of Mauritius, if I'm not mistaken, it increased the income by about 15 to 20%. The rest is government, and then tuition fees, which is now disappearing. So I think what we need to do, what I think institutions, universities need to do, is sit down with government and really put everything cards on the table. Do you believe in higher education? Do you believe in universities? If you do, then these are the crises. You cannot continue with year in, year out, either the grant is maintained for public institutions or it disappears, and year in, year out, because of political pressures, students refuse to pay fees, or the fees get reduced. And linked with that is the whole issue of loan. As yet, I think in Africa, we haven't established a proper loan system for students. That would be the ideal way, although you're paying it, a bit later on, not upfront. But that could have been a solution. And not many countries have really, in not many countries has evolved a proper loan scheme. I think we need really to sort out this issue of financing, because if governments do believe that higher education institutions play an important part, universities have a role to play in development, then you've got to finance it. How can they survive? And then there is the whole divide between private and public. And I'm not saying this because Paul is here, and I know he comes from private institutions. I think this divide between public and private may have eventually to be removed, because many public institutions are operating as private ones at times. If you look at Makerere at one time, the bulk of its money was coming from student fees. Those students who could not be getting scholarships, but they're paying separately. Kenya University of Nairobi went the same way, and so on. So public universities starting to function as private. On the other hand, you have private institutions which have made a way of ensuring that they get some sort of grant from government. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Botswana has done this. So I think this public-private, dichotomy, it's there. You cannot get away from it. But I think we need to remove it, and we need to make sure that the fly-by-night institutions, private institutions that we talked about, do not exist on the scene. They are the ones that are doing a lot of harm. There are so many universities, private universities, doing good work in Africa, but they are lumped in together with those little institutions all over every corner of the street, having a lecture room on the top floor, functioning as a shop, and they are the ones that are doing a lot of harm in Africa. I think, to me, financing is a major issue for Africa, and until this issue is resolved, it's unlikely that we will really make significant progress as far as universities is concerned. And we've got a long way to go. New universities are being created, almost public universities are created literally every year. If you look at Ethiopia, the number of universities that has come up over the last decade, where does government get the money for it? And because it doesn't get the money, the quality starts going down. You keep you need to have more enrollment, increase the enrollment, create massification. You don't get the money, and you expect to deliver quality good. I mean, you know, the equation just doesn't work that way. So I think we need to, as associations, we need really to put this up front, discuss it at national level, at regional level, at continental level, to make our governments understand that unless this is sorted out, it will not work. I think one way could be through a taxation system. You tax every individual by a certain amount. I mean, Ghana does this. I think Nigeria does it, but only for capital funding, not necessarily for running expenses. But government will have to find a way of getting the money and giving it to the institutions with certain provisos, of course. It's not just giving money just because we have the money. There must be certain criteria. There must be certain, you must show the how you use the money, the output, and all the rest of it. So I think this is going to be a major issue. While I have the floor, Francis, I think later on one thing that I would like to talk about, which hasn't come up yet, and it's the whole issue of corruption in higher education, which is linked a little bit to finances and all the rest of it. A serious issue that is disruptive. I think we can perhaps talk about it later on after you finish your financing round, and perhaps Puleng has a contribution to make on financing.
Well, thank you, Gulam. Puleng, I certainly know that you would like to come in. I think you're muted, Puleng. Puleng, you are muted.
I'm quite excited about the discussion around financing. And I don't think I'd like to rehash what Professor Gulam and Zeleza have already said in the typology of philanthropic foundations and money that we make from subsidies. And probably we should even problematize the whole notion of thinking about financing and think around how do we resource universities beyond just the rands and cents, the dollars, yuans, and euros. Probably, if we were to say, how do we partner sectorally and multi-sectorally in order to ensure that these partnerships offset some of the financial burdens that are imposed on us, either because of the challenges of financial aid systems in Africa or no clear systematic investment in regard to education tax, for example, which should be financing the capital inputs into the university systems. But I also think African universities approach the corporate sector or private sector not as a partner, but only to ask for corporate citizenship or corporate social responsibility. Probably we must draw on the lessons of our friends, either in the other parts of the global south or the global north, where universities become the resource, the intellectual ideas behind the successful businesses, institutions, and therefore the reinvestment in financing are available. I think as Paul clearly stated, in the global north, particularly the American higher education system, the critical engagement in the national innovation systems or in their innovation systems is this relationship between research and commercialization. And I think that's an area that we haven't catapulted in our universities in the continent, and we should be seeking that. The third part is that I read a very interesting book by a Chinese scholar and writer on the next, she refers to Africa as the next factory of the world. What that means is that we also, thinking around the financing system, we must also locate our contextual residents as a university and optimize the resources that are available within our context? Why is it our private sector? I'll give an example of mining in South Africa. Why do they have to send materials to India, to Europe, and to the Americas for beneficiation when we have the technical knowledge of that? How have we as universities in the continent demonstrated that we would want to partner in order to ensure that the businesses in Africa become transnational businesses that reinvest and recapitalize the university system? Finally, I have this exciting example from Kenya, where one of the former vice chancellors, I think, realized during the AIDS pandemic that funeral parlors were not good. But she also recognized that this would have been important for medical students to learn from the cadavers and developed a whole value chain that was resourceful to responding optimally to the challenges of society dealing with HIV and AIDS, but also the economic challenges related to. Why is it impossible for us as African universities to begin also to mapping what might be resourceful business ideas that respond to the challenges in our societies, but which could actually reinvest in engaging society to improve itself whilst they also support us? I think we therefore have to match this idea of financing of higher education, not only with government investment in terms of subsidies, inputs and grants, or in terms of philanthropic third stream contributions, but really to these partnerships that are progressive, that would actually be revolutionary for us as they are revolutionary to responding to the challenges our societies are contending with. Thank you.
Thank you, Puleng. And I want to finish off the this financial challenge, because I think there had been a session in the conference of the last, it might have been yesterday, where there had been a debate on the finances. But I want to put very briefly something on the table. In fact, it also came through the chat box, about how do we utilize the virtual environment to optimize the financial models of universities. So could there be perhaps certain sections in universities that could be done virtually? So you don't have an offering at every university. It's been done virtually, and you pull the expertise from other parts of the continent, but also from other parts of the world, to be able to develop a virtual setup. And then because I think that's sort of some of the things that I think one should be thinking about, utilizing technology to bring down your cost. Because often people say, and there's an assessment that's been done, that technology should effectively bring down cost. In the business and industry, they talk about doing more with less. And I think there is where technology needs to come in, but it needs to appear in your bottom line in a sense. Otherwise, you're just shifting deck chairs on the from one direction to the other. So maybe just a brief comment, and I'm going to start with Puleng because she has ended. Just a brief comment in terms of a virtual garnering of resources.
I definitely concur with you, Prof. Peterson, that we should optimize technologies. But I think before we optimize technologies, we should think around developing technologies that we are going to be using. Because on the one hand, by using technologies that we do not own, we are actually giving away our own data, which in the current context is currency for business. The second part is that the ownership systems, including the platforms that we're using, become the repositories of knowledge that are our own. And therefore, when we do that, we should have mapped what are the opportunities, what are the liabilities that we would be exposing ourselves to when we get into this system. The third aspect that I think is quite important is not just only of the ownership user rights related. You rightly stated that if we were to develop constructive partnerships with the telcos in our countries and ensure that we strengthen the knowledge base around the technological ICTs and even social platforms, or how to converge our knowledge systems in ways that are accessible, we would save a lot. We will be lean but impactful. And finally, I want to state that we should do so also with the requisite intention to ensuring that human encounters are possible. Because when we look at the World Economic Forum report around the future world of work, it also highlights that some of the skills that will enable people to become resilient, to participate optimally in the digital economies, require the soft skills of critical thinking, analysis, emotional intelligence, but also ability to move with any new invention in the technology systems. So I think we still have to create a balanced, collaborative approaches with knowledges, with digital systems, and to really recognize that the digital systems must always be the levers, the partners, but also the systems that we create for optimization of the higher education systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. I don't know whether Gulam, yourself or Paul would like to comment on the virtual optimization within the finance model.
Yeah, sure. I can make a comment. Before I do that, just to point out, I think when we are talking about financing of higher education, we shouldn't think this is a problem for Africa only. This is a problem even for the wealthiest country in the world, called the United States, in which student debt last year was $1.6 trillion, higher than credit card debt, and more than 3 million Americans aged 60 and above owes $86 billion in debt. The system is broken everywhere, and it's partly broken because of neoliberal ideology that has been, of course, dominant in running global economies since the 1980s. So this is a much more profound problem than simply one institution or one country. If a lot of universities in the US are not even supposed to survive COVID-19. So in terms of the technology part, I agree with Pauline that it's important for us as institutions to collaborate with each other in order to share courses, to share programs, and to share faculty resources, which are, of course, one of the areas in which we spend a lot of money. Currently, our university is involved in, we are developing a big project with the MasterCard Foundation, together with another university, in which we're going to be doing two things. One is, content acquisition and development, whereby we're going to be developing a number of online programs that can be shared in a consortium of about 13 universities, African universities. And then secondly, also sharing in the development of e-learning instructional design and pedagogy. So, through that program, we are hoping, of course, we are going to benefit, but we will be able to pool resources from, institutions across the continent. In fact, some of the ones we're going to be collaborating with are in South Africa. So it is important for us, I think, in this space to really think collaboration, collaboration, and collaboration.
Okay. Thank you very much, Paul. Gulam, have you got any comments on that?
Yes, if I may as well make a quick comment on the financing that following up from what Paul said, it would be very interesting to look at China. The dramatic change it has brought about in its higher education sector with such modern technology, with such development, such big enrollment and so on. Of course, we're talking of a different type of country, a different size of country, but perhaps Paul is right. Is our model, our economic model, our political model, is there something wrong in there that is preventing us really from developing our higher education system? Because if America is broke, you know, how can Africa expect to survive eventually? But that's just by way of comment about the financing. As far as the using the virtual part of it, I think it's a must for all universities. At the University of Mauritius, although we are a very small university, and we were a small university, now I think we've got University of Mauritius come to a reasonable size, but and distance was not an issue. It's a small island. You can travel within 1 hour from one part of the island to the other part of the island. And yet the University of Mauritius created a virtual center which developed programs and courses very professionally done by professional instructional designers and training students on how to use it for its blended learning approach. And one of the reasons was that we could not develop physically. The lecture rooms were limited. We started when we thought we would have about 50 per lecture room. We ended up requiring about 200. It was not possible to suddenly expand very quickly. So we used the blended learning approach to supplement the face-to-face teaching. And it has worked very well. But the notion, Francis, that it's a way of a cheap way of training students is wrong. It is as expensive if you do it properly. Online learning is as expensive as face-to-face because of the technology that you need, because of the training that is required, because of the professional people that you need. You have to train the faculty as well, and you have to train the students as well. It is not cheap. My general view is that using virtual, and online learning and so on is good for use as blended learning. And I fully agree with Puleng that you should not always go entirely virtual. You must bring in the face-to-face aspect to it, because that is the sort of skills that's required in the future. But this is for the young students. But as far as those who've missed out on higher education, people who are already in industry, people who do not have time, cannot afford to come, for them, I think we need to create a corner where we can deliver courses to them and programs to them and make sure that they are adequately trained. But going fully virtual for any institution, even open universities, I think, are using a different approach now. Don't go entirely virtual. I think this face-to-face contact more and more is showing that it's important for our survival. We just cannot become completely virtual. The consequences in another 2 or 3 decades could be dramatic if we do that. So I think yes for virtual, but use with caution and don't get fooled by the fact that this is a cheaper way out. It isn't. If done properly, it is as expensive.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that to a certain extent, what I distill out of that, there is the blended learning approach that one should have, but within that, there could also be a collaborative approach where you start institutions to link up, and you don't need to duplicate expertise necessarily in all of the institutions. But that is something that I think we need to pursue further. Puleng, I want to come back to you. You use the terminology humanizing pedagogical approach a couple of times in your presentations, and I would like you to probably explain to the audience how you, what is your interpretation and how would you make it meaningful within a institution of higher learning?
Thank you. My sense is that the context that we framed as shaping university systems in the continent are quite important. So universities have always been somewhat elitist. they've always, they were, at least in the context of South Africa, but I also know in the continent, that they tended to embrace those who had access to economies and not necessarily those who are on the margins of the economies. And particularly, they forgot that women, people living with disabilities, sexual minorities, came to university to seek knowledge in order for self-development, for contribution to society and to the global arena. So my understanding of humanizing pedagogies are intentional decisions around our curriculum, our teaching systems, whether they're virtual or they're via contact, that restore the dignity of humanity. The second aspect is that we are also aware that for us to create some inventions, there has sometimes been deliberate abuses of certain groups within societies. When we think around vaccines, for instance, if you were to think about syphilis and the marginals in the United States as the African diaspora, or in the context of Africa where issues of health and reproductive systems or HIV and AIDS testing were sometimes done without consent. So my suggestion is that even for natural sciences, for inventions, for health systems, the knowledge systems and how we still continue to find insights that are revolutionary, that are progressive, that change the world for the better in the humanities, in economic sciences and management, but also in digital technology spaces. We still have to recognize that being, that ontology, that idea of being human or of the planet being an important part of our interface would be important. So that's what I mean, Chair, and thank you.
Thank you. Puleng, if you respond to the next question, if you can just maybe closer to the mic, your sound sort of fade a bit when you respond. Okay. So I want to come back to, and in fact, it's a mixture between the curricula and the knowledge system that you talked about, but bring in the skills component. And I'm going to probably zoom into Gulam to talk a little bit about the graduate employability, because that for me, it talks about, we on the first day, we talk about the purpose of the university. And we talk about social agents and social mobility, and effectively to focus on social justice. But if you have a large proportion of your graduates that is not absorbed by the economy, because the economy have not got that absorbed activity, that in itself creates a threat for higher education. And in fact, it also creates a confidence challenge with the graduates. So how do one tackle that in a better way? And I think there was a question in the chat box about what should universities be doing? Should we, in terms of making sure that we develop students in such a way that they could be absorbed by the economy, and what role does the other sectors, the economy, needs to play in that? Gulam, I don't know whether you want to explore that a bit, because that is quite crucial as well as we go into uncertain times where economies are going to be challenged, and how do we look at that? And maybe you could bring in that also the comment that Paul made about the attributes that is required in this new world order of world of work. So I'm giving that over to Gulam, and then obviously Paul and Puleng, you can also come in and respond. Gulam, over to you.
Okay, I think in my view, this whole issue of employability, graduate employability, arises from the fact that in Africa, we've done away with the differentiation of tertiary education. I think, and I'm sorry to say it started with South Africa. Well, it started with Britain, actually, getting rid of their polytechnics. And it came down to South Africa getting rid of your famous technicons, for which I had my training as an engineer. And, I do appreciate and understand the importance of the technicons used to play. And you gradually, and this is being repeated almost everywhere, we're getting rid of institutions which are directly linked with industry, like the technicons and polytechnics and so on, where the employment rate is almost 100%, and converting them into universities, and we get what is known as academic drift. Initially, these technical universities that were created in South Africa and are being created elsewhere were supposed to maintain, the sort of profile that they used to have, but just give them an opportunity to also run degree courses and so on, which they were not doing before. But the graduate drift, the academic drift, quickly took in, and the universities started converting themselves and thinking, we are universities, we must compete with the best universities, well, best in inverted commas, in our country, and we're going to operate as universities. I think if you look at any society, there is no way that you can only have graduates that need to be produced. And yet that seems to be the mentality that I think we've set ourselves in, that we need every single student must go to a university. That's the wish of every parent. I want my child to go to a university. And we never think in terms of technical and vocational education. We never think in terms of polytechnics. And the opportunity is not given to these students, because TVET, if you look at technical and vocational education, which is in terrible state in Africa, the reason for it is because of, one looks down on TVET. It's only those who have not done well in secondary school that goes on to technical and vocational education. If you look at Germany, if you look at Korea, South Korea, if you look at so many other countries where people are more, you channel students, you channel young students to areas where they're comfortable with, where they're good at, and you don't force them to become graduates if that's not their wish and that's not their will. But then you must, give value to whatever they're doing. I think the whole issue of employability in Africa needs to be looked at from a point of view of systemic educational system. We cannot look at universities as being the only tertiary education. It needs to be expanded and included with polytechnics, technical colleges, colleges of nursing, and so on, and bring in even technical and vocational education of a slightly higher standard. They don't have to leave primary school to go to TVET. They can do so after secondary school as well, and bring value to it. That is the way I think we can reduce the situation of employability. You talk to the employers. It's very interesting. When we started at the University of Mauritius, whereas most of the African countries use the route of setting up traditional universities, typical universities, you imitate on London and Sorbonne or whatever it is, Mauritius used a very different route. It created a developmental universities. When I came with a PhD from University of Manchester, you can imagine my shock and horror that not a single degree in engineering was being run. And I said, what is this? You call this a university? But over the years, I appreciated what university did. And its aim was very simple. You produce the manpower that the country needs, link up with the requirement of your economy, produce people that you need for your economy. And at that time of our development, which was going through an industrial phase, we needed technicians. We needed good technicians, people who've come from secondary school, but very good, whether it is in the sugar industry, whether it is in textile, whether it is in chemical engineering or whatever. And gradually over the years, we, upgraded ourselves and become a university with a big problem, though, that we never created proper polytechnics. And it's only now, about 4 or 5 years ago, with a lot of shouting and so on being done at different quarters, that we're reverting back to polytechnics and reevaluating and ensuring that we have proper polytechnics. So I think we need to have a spectrum of tertiary education and not concentrate on university alone. And the people who can do it are the people at university. If people at university don't do it, the others won't value it. They will think that, we will always consider them as lower category people from that sector. So we at university must take the lead, explain why it is important for all of us to function as a spectrum, that all of us have, produced valuable people that are required from industry. They need graduates, of course, but they need technicians as well. And all of us work together. This is from a more vocational point of view. But the other part of it, the point that you raised, was the question of attributes. I think it's extremely important. And you just talk to industry and they tell you straight away that if you have two graduates coming to them, one having a first-class honors degree, and the other one perhaps a second or even a third-class degree, but who's dynamic, who can communicate, who can challenge you, who can work as a team, who can provide leadership, they will go for that one, not for the one who's academically qualified. And yet the expectation is that you will choose the best qualified graduate from the university rather than the one who's poorly qualified. So even at university level, we have this classification of the best academically qualified and all the rest of it. That is fine. But let's not belittle the people who are coming out, even if they have a lower qualifications of a slightly lower class, but who are dynamic, who are good, and bring them up, give them in positions, provide them the necessary skills so that when they go out in industry, they are very good. And the other point is, why doesn't industry, I get the feeling that in Africa, industry just keeps talking. These are the skills that we need. These are the sort of people that we need. You're not providing us the right skills. Well, I think universities must turn to them to say, thank you very much, but what are you doing about it? How can't you help us? Why don't you come to our campus and help us in providing the skills that you need? We'll provide the area for you, we'll provide whatever, and you can come and choose the type of people that you need, the type of students that you need, but come and help us. Don't just sit over there and criticize the university and say, you're no good, you're not providing students with skills. So I think this is an area where we can really link up with industry, get to know what is it that they want, bring them to the campus, let them select the sort of students, the sort of skills that they need, provide the training, and also at the same time, eventually recruit our graduates.
Okay, thank you, Ghulam. Paul, I don't know whether you want to come in on this point?
Yes, I think both Puleng and Ghulam have made absolutely excellent points. I think in terms of curriculum development, which is one of our core functions, to Ghulam's point, as we are developing curriculum, I think it's important not only obviously internally to look at what is, intellectually compelling and so on and so forth, but also to what extent is our curriculum responding to the employment needs, the economic needs, the social needs of our societies. And that relationship has to be one that is very, very close. I know as universities, we tend to be very wary of vocationalization of what we do. But at the same time, I think you can do it in a way that does not, quote unquote, dilute what we think is valued in terms of education. So curriculum development, the way it is done, and the kinds of collaborations that are built into that is very critical. And for me, a curriculum that will help us deal with these issues of employability is that it has to be holistic. It has to integrate what I call the classroom, the campus, and the community as learning spaces. Because students are not simply learning in the classroom. In fact, they spend the least time in the classroom. They spend most of their time on the campus. So to what extent are we intentionally using the campus, student activities, and all sorts of things that they're doing to build their learning, their leadership skills, and so on. And of course, what are they doing in the community? For example, at our university, we require every student to do community service. It's not an add-on, it's embedded in the curriculum. And then the other thing is we have to, I think, try to promote, sort of inclusive, innovative, intersectional, and interdisciplinary teaching and learning. How you design the curriculum to promote that is extremely important. So again, at our university, we don't expect students to start, quote unquote, majoring until, the second year or third year. And the reason is you want to expose them to this wide range of knowing, different, ways of knowing from the humanities, social sciences, and of course, eventually they specialize in pharmacy or finance or whatever it is. But you want to give them this general education. And then I think, to the first point and to the point that Gulam was making is to embed the curriculum in terms of experiential learning, include within it active, work-based, personalized, and competency-based learning. Again, we require all our students to do internships. And internship is not to go to an office and carry a cup of coffee, but to actually make sure that that internship is tied to their learning, whether it's in psychology, it's in pharmacy, it's in finance, it's in film, or what have you. And I think the other thing is perhaps to make sure that we instill in these young people, our students, the mindset of creativity, the mindset of enterprise, of innovation, of problem solving, of resilience, of patience, than mindsets of passive learning, which we have tended to regurgitate over time. One of the presenters, I think it was yesterday, saying that we have put too much emphasis on exams. And we have not changed the ways in which we assess our students. It's exam-oriented, and we expect them to regurgitate all this information instead of really continuous assessment, instead of competency-based, and so on. In short, I think we need to make sure that the curriculum design and delivery is one that inculcates skill sets and mindsets that prepares these young people for employability. That means combining the hard skills, the content knowledges, the soft skills, the liberal arts skills. I get worried when people talk about just STEM. I'm a humanist and social scientist. Of course, STEM is extremely important, and we need to, put a lot of resources. I rather talk about, as we, the term STEAM, where the arts are embedded in that. When you look at somebody like, Steve Jobs, he was not necessarily very technically trained himself, but he had this ability, appreciating the aesthetics of the machines and the products he was creating with very high levels of technical expertise. And you need to combine aesthetics, the arts, the liberal arts, with the technical fields and science and technology and so on and so forth. And the future for me is really to combine all these modalities of learning, face-to-face, blended, and online, and find synergies between the three that make them more and more conducive towards the kind of transformative teaching and learning that the students need. Let me just make one last point. As we are thinking of technology, one of the things I think we are so, obviously because we're dealing with a crisis now, we are focusing on to what extent are we developing online technologies and so on, which is important. But I think there is another side of the technology question that Africa needs to think about. What is, and Puleng made reference to this, what is the capability that we are developing in our societies for high performance computing? So when a lot of us, when we talk about storage of our data, the big data, much of that is stored in Europe, it is stored in the United States, and increasingly China. Those three contain the bulk of the capacities for high performance computing and dealing with data. If you look at the distribution, Africa only has 0.2% of high performance computing, and much of that is in South Africa. The rest of us have zero. What that means is that in the first industrial revolution, we participated by selling our people who produced those commodities for industrialization. In the second one, we were busy producing raw materials during the colonial moment. And now, in the fourth industrial revolution, we are busy selling our data. And we're even paying for that privilege. So let's think about that big issue.
Thank you very much, Paul. Puleng, a response from your side, and then what I will do is I will try to end off by asking each one of you just to give me an indication. Remember, this is a Higher Education Leadership Management Summit. So we need to give some advice, purely from our perspective, to our next generation of leaders in this sector. And I'm going to ask you just to give maybe one thought in the context as we move into this future of uncertainty. What would you give to an academic head, a dean, a senior director or an executive director, a deputy vice chancellor or a vice chancellor to take through? So that is what I'm gonna do. But I'm gonna ask Puleng maybe to respond on the graduate employability, and then I'm gonna start off with you, Puleng, to maybe just then respond, because we got about 15 minutes left. And so I want us to summarize that, and then I'll make some concluding remarks at the end.
Yes. Thank you very much, Chair. I actually was quite fascinated when Professor Zeleza took on that idea around developing our own technological systems. I'm particularly thinking this is one
Puleng, Puleng, can you just a little bit closer to the mic?
Oh.
All right.
Yes.
Are you all right? Okay, yeah, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yes, I'm particularly excited about that point, because we have learned on the natural resources, on the biotic resources, that if we do not equip ourselves to at least some measure of ownership or creating benefit sharing systems that are resourceful financially, but also in terms of technology transfer and knowledge exchange, that we will always be quoting ourselves as providing 0.0 or 2% into the global knowledge arena. So for my take is that we have to, as African universities leader, begin to inspire our students, staff, and society to valuing and investing in universities, so that we can also resource civic, corporate, and public systems, and that they are not dependent on the global north to give us their old or archaic technologies. The second part is that to do so would therefore to enable us to teach our students not only to look for employment, but to create employment. How do we do so? We do so by resourcing their creativity, by nurturing their understanding of the resources management systems, as well as the financial management systems, and their civic duty or responsibility towards those. We also teach them to care about the world they live in, but also the world they don't know. We should allow and encourage students and staff to think beyond thinking or beyond their wildest dreams, because the ideas around inventions come from that. One example is we are looking at now space research or the development of EV cars and the profitability of those in a private company run by Elon Musk. But if we were to trace the histories of the evolution of the knowledge that has empowered that business, we will realize that it comes from our own sites of research at CSIR, at Stellenbosch University, at Limpopo University, which were collaborating on the idea of producing lithium battery or the EV car. So what this means is that when these partnerships are formed that are global or that are even local. We must always sensitize our students to think around the future. They should not be limited by also the challenges of the past or the present, but these ideas of dreaming the future and ensuring that ownership is also an important discourse. Finally, I think if I were to encourage academic staff, a head of department, don't mind whether people underestimate your talent. Always give your best, always do your best, and always seek the best mentors and the best people who will not just praise you, but who will cultivate resourceful critique, advisory, empowerment, and encouragement. And I think I have been a beneficiary of constructive mentors that did not just say the sweetest of things to me, but that also expected accountability, agility, and hard work. So that's what I would encourage youth and young adults, but also emergent scholars and those who are aspiring for leadership. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Puleng. Gulam, maybe your last thoughts?
Yes, thank you. I very much would like to reflect what Puleng has said. My advice to whoever is working in the academic field would be that having gone through it for so many years, have no regrets at all of having taken up an academic life. It's enriching, it's so valuable, and it's so fulfilling. And it doesn't matter if you don't make much money, and most academics don't make a lot of money, but the richness and the fulfillment that you get out of it, as far as contact with people is concerned, as contact with students is concerned, as the pleasure of meeting students years after coming to you and say, you were my professor, I remember you, and I think I'm still using your principle. That alone is worth $1 million, I think. And I think that is something that I think academics must continue to remember. So my advice will be exactly what Puleng said. Whatever you do in the academic setting, do it with honesty, with hard work, with compassion, with humility, with respect for all level of colleagues and workers that you work with, including the students. And there is no shortcut to using these basic values, because if you do, ultimately it can lead to your fall. I don't know whether there are students participating in here in your forum, but if there are, my advice to them would be that life is like a ladder, and you need to go to every rung of the ladder to go to the top. Please, when you leave the university, don't think you want to jump and come to the top rung immediately. You lose out so much from it. Go rung by rung, learn from each step that you go up, and you will see you will have no regrets afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gulam. Paul, you got the final.
Yeah, thank you. I think I concur with everything that my two colleagues have said. If I was to leave, give advice to younger colleagues, is that you're working in a learning institution. Therefore, be a learner yourself. Always be a learner. And you do that in a number of ways. Obviously, provide yourself the opportunities for training. None of us was a born vice chancellor or dean or head of department. So be humble enough to know that you don't know, and learn by attending formal training opportunities. Secondly, learn through research. Keep yourself abreast of the trends in the sector, because if you don't understand those trends, it will be very difficult for you to provide the kind of leadership that your institution and you yourself need. And thirdly, always pay attention to collaboration and consultation. I want to quote two of you who made presentations. Professor Sibongile Mutwa said something that was very important. She said, I asked for her forgiveness if I misquote her. She said that we can't always know And that is an attitude of humility. You can't always know. Accept reality of multiple futures. In other words, give yourself the permission not to always be fixed in a particular position, because the future, you can't predict it. And respond, she said, to unpredictable events as best as you can. And then finally, to quote you, Mr. Chair, who is conducting this session, you said that it's important for us as we try to build trust. We have to earn that trust, and we have to try to keep that trust through collaboration, through co-creation, and through partnership. And you said it's important to use our head, our hand, and our heart together, because all three are important. The head is the intellect, the heart is the empathy, and the hand is the practice. So thank you very much. That's what I would advise young people.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. You took my words again. No, but thank you very much. I want to, before I thank the panel, and I'm not going to try to summarize, but I want to leave this, because that is actually what came out of the discussion. Often people in all levels articulate by saying that universities are the cosmoses of society. They reflect society. And I think what we're trying to say today is that universities actually are institutions that ought to show what society should look like. And that transformative aspect that we always have to keep in mind. We're moving in a world, in a future of uncertainty. You have explained what the leadership qualities and what advice for leadership needs to have. We talked about some of the challenges. There's obviously a lot. We talk about finances. We talk about skills. We talk about knowledge. We're talking about the humanizing pedagogy in all what we do. And there was a lot of other challenges that also came up over the last 2.5 days. So I would like to say thank you, Puleng Lenkabula, Gula Mohammed Bai, and Paul Salesa for invigorating and a very exciting panel discussion. And I am pretty sure that what you have shared with the audience and what you have shared with higher education leadership management in this specific summit will assist in terms of assisting the new generation of leaders. So at this point, I'm going to give back to our host, Professor Martin Oosthuizen. But just one last thought, because there was such a lot of passion when we're talking about skills and we're talking about different institutions that is important in the higher education sector. Martin is heading up an initiative with the Cape Higher Education Consortium where they bring the 4 institutions together. And I don't know, there was a point when I was down there that we talked about including the TVET colleges as well. We started one, and Puleng is one of the key initiators of that, in the University of the Free State, the Central University of Technology, Saul Plaatje University, and the TVET colleges, to talk about collaboration, articulation, and making sure that we don't have mission creep in some of our mandates. And I think those are more conversation that we need to happen. So Martin, on that note, back to you, to our host, and thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you indeed.
Thank you very much, Francis. I think that everybody who has attended this morning's session will agree on one thing, and that is that Professor Francis Peterson is an excellent facilitator of a discussion. I think that you did a fantastic job, Francis, and that it was really a very rich discussion. I also think that our 3 panelists did a wonderful job this morning of sketching a very broad canvas in a very realistic and sober kind of way of the challenges that we face. And I think, what was very clear to me was that while we come from different parts of the African continent, we share a range of challenges and that we can only benefit from working together. I think as well, colleagues, that you would all have been struck by the ethical and principled leadership qualities of all our speakers this morning, and also by their flexibility and openness to explore new frameworks and to accept that things cannot just continue as they have in the past, and that in order to meet the grand challenges that face us, we need to be adaptive and flexible. As Prof. Francis has said, at the Cape Higher Education Consortium, we are exploring ways of working more closely with the TVET colleges, and we're also busy with a dual higher education project, which is exploring a curriculum model which is quite popular in Europe, which involves much closer collaboration between industry and the universities. So huge thanks to our facilitator and our discussants from this morning. And at this stage, I hand over back then to Dr. Oliver Seal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Oosthuizen, and what an amazing way to finish our day, our half day today, and the 2.5 days of the HELM Summit. Colleagues, I know it's been, you've invested quite a bit of your time and energies to participate in this exciting event. What we will do now is really just wrap up the 2.5 days and allow for some time of reflection. I've asked 2 colleagues to join me in this reflection. Will be Professor Ahmed Bauer, our CEO at USAf, and my colleague and advisor of HELM, Professor Fatix Fitzgerald. They can turn on their cameras and we can initiate the discussion. Colleagues, as we draw the summit to a close, I think we all agree that this has been really a very exciting and invigorating experience and opportunity for reflections. I'd like to just ask you to just briefly, sort of turn your gaze back on when we started on Wednesday and identify for us what were sort of the key challenges, issues and opportunities raised at the summit and in relation to your own observation. So just reflect on the challenges, issues and opportunities. And let me start with Patrick Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Oliver, and greetings to colleagues and participants, dedicated and resourceful cadres of higher education all. This USAf HELM virtual summit appears to have provided the South African higher education community with some kind of much welcomed voice and discussion platform after the tumultuous events of 2020 following the COVID-19 global pandemic. One pervasive feeling seemed to be relief that the sector and the institutions have in some way or another survived this period reasonably intact. And in point of fact, starting with the minister's speech, and in the spirit of the strategic cliche that a good crisis should never be wasted, there was even some optimism that important breakthroughs had been made, particularly in the general unleashing of new pedagogical techniques, technologies, or technologically enabled pedagogical means, thereby pointing the system perhaps earlier to its inevitable future. Sorry, I'm back, I think.
Yes, you are.
Right.
We can hear you.
Thank you. A good crisis should never be wasted, because in times of crisis, players and actors are prepared to reframe problems and challenge work in new ways, try out new solutions and interventions, and cooperate with a greater range of stakeholders and networks. Crisis smashes complacency and business as usual, facilitates new kinds of leadership and management approaches, and forces re-examination of fundamental purposes and core values. The summit was themed around the topics of leadership and management. And indeed, the topic of leadership attracted much attention and application of mind. At times, leadership was demonstrated, at other times called for, and at other times envisaged or hoped for. There was less clarity in terms of how the sector intended to achieve more systemic and anticipatory leadership development, or what the specific factors might be, which will allow for a renewal and ongoing cultivation of appropriate leadership. But this is a matter for HELM should take up with further analysis and action. Further to this, there was a greater emphasis on intellectual leadership than on institutional leadership, which perhaps reflects inevitably the character of our sector and, of course, the characters attracted to our sector. It may be, however, that some more attention needs to be given to the question of institutional leadership and to associated governance issues, as the current COVID-19 circumstances may to some extent be masking and directing attention away from certain pervasive and perennial weaknesses still besetting many of our institutions, and which remain problematic in terms of optimal institutional and system performance. Again, there would seem to be a role for USAf and HELM in assisting in improvement efforts. Management, also in the title of the summit, received somewhat less attention than the more sexy topic of leadership. Management is a more specialized area, and while some contributors did focus on institutional issues and the management leader matrix, less in-depth discussion transpired. Despite the merit of contentions that the sector is underfunded, especially in terms of the multiple social and economic purposes expected of it, it remains the case that resources and plant are not usually optimally leveraged, nor is the intellectual capital of the sector fully aligned to the purposes and tasks of 21st century African universities. There may well be some lingering hangover from the old managerialist debate that too much focus on management erodes the academic mission. It is surely true that inappropriate management models and applications, toxic management leadership, mismanagement, incompetence, and corruption will strongly militate against academic productivity. On the other hand, given all the challenges eloquently unpacked during the summit, for example, complex and rapidly changing environments, dazzling digital and technological advances, massification of the system, issues of effective affirmative epistemological access, questions of sustainability, fragility, and resilience, and the requirements of the global and national knowledge economy, it becomes all the more essential that our university institutions are well governed and excellently managed, making the most of the various categories of resources available. I believe HELM will need to put in extreme work and effort in assisting in this regard. My final comment on proceedings goes to the pertinent questions raised as to the nature and purpose of the university. That is, in South Africa, now, in the 21st century, from 2020 and beyond. It behoves a sector and a society to ask this question from time to time. And indeed, it is currently not entirely evident that there is a clear idea and working consensus in broad South African society as to what universities are for, what they should and should not be expected to do or expected to deliver, and especially their core and priority functions and tasks. I believe this debate will need to be carried out in the sector, as well as in the broader society, by USAf and by other relevant parties. And that this debate will serve to frame and inform the way HELM goes about its mission and tasks in terms of leadership and management development. Thank you, Oliver. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Professor Fitzgerald. Professor Ahmed Bawa, your thoughts, please.
Thank you so much, Oliver. And let me just begin where Patrick finished, which is to say this has been a stunning summit, and I really want to thank you and your team for pulling it together and making it such a wonderful event. And I have to say, this last session, is three of my favorite people on it. Like, was really a stunning kind of session, which kind of raised huge issues that face our system. So thank you very much for that. I don't want to repeat what Patrick has said, but I just want to, I tried to, as I listened to everything, try to pull together, just what I think are the key issues, if you like, and for us to address, if you like. And when I say us, I don't mean, USAf and so on, but us as a collective, as across the whole system, if you like. And clearly, COVID-19 has been a massive disruption, and I'm thinking of disruption here not just simply as something that kind of, brought us all to a halt, but also as an opportunity, if you like, to kind of think about what we could learn from it and what it engendered as kind of as opportunities for development and so on. But I think we have to remind ourselves, and Puleng did that today. I think she really focused in on that. Professor Lekabula really focused in on that, which is to remind us, in fact, that that COVID-19 is a disruption, but we just have to remind ourselves that actually the student activism of 2015 to 2017 was as powerful a disruption as COVID-19 has been. In fact, I mean, I would say that if one just looks at what has happened in the sector post 2016, 2017, it's clear that that was a major moment in the history of our sector, and that we've learned a lot from that. And I think that we have, when we think about this, this period from 2015 to 2017, and then now COVID-19. And then remind ourselves, in fact, that at the beginning of every academic year, we had disruptions at our universities, which were around financial aid and student accommodation mostly. There are lessons for us to learn, from this history of ours. So clearly, there are short-term challenges that we face, which which we have to deal with. The issues around the sustainability of our universities, both the short-term financial sustainabilities and the long-term kind of reimagined sustainabilities of our universities. And that's something I think that we're going to have to focus on and try and understand how to deal with them. And I think that we all have to also understand that as we navigate this next period, if you like, that the way in which we deal with the short-term challenges really has implications for the long-term, for the long-term sustainability of our universities. So that's something I think for us to think about, which is to say, can we focus in on that? Which is to say, as we imagine solutions for the short term, let's also imagine what the long term would be. Just reimagining the future of higher education. So, just trying to galvanize, not galvanize, but rather to synthesize kind of ideas that emerged from the 2 days. I go back to this idea, that one of the key challenges we face is reimagining this relationship between universities and their publics, kind of universities in context, and we can start, trying to, each university should really understand, what those publics are and how to kind of develop strong relationships with those publics. And it's all about the social ownership of our universities. And I think that is something that's come through the whole thread of the discussions over the last 3 days. There's a second issue, and the second issue was very much a focus today, I think, which is this idea of really trying to understand, how universities can galvanize their capacities to maximize the development of our students, to really focus in on students and understanding that is our core function. We are knowledge-intensive institutions, but our primary mission is producing new generations of intellectuals, organic intellectuals, and so on. And as I think about those two, there are a number of threads, that cut across them. One is, what we've learned over the years is the need for a strong social justice rubric around which to build ideas around, the reimagining of our universities. Secondly, without question, just this new technology moment, and I'm not calling it the fourth industrial revolution or anything like that, but really just saying this new technology moment and what are its implications. And that came through over and over again in the session, but also came through in the discussions today. And I fully agree with with Professor Lekabula that actually it's, we have to be careful that the technologies are socially created, they're socially modulated, and that when we think about the use of technologies, we have to really not be driven by the technologies, but understand that there's an opportunity for us to use technologies for improving the quality of life of people and so on. And then thirdly, I think what's come through this period around COVID-19 has been this really powerful understanding of the need for partnerships, the need for strategic partnerships, the idea that we really have to work, we have to work amongst ourselves, amongst institutions. We have to work with external organizations. The whole idea of employability is not something that's going to be solved by the universities themselves. It has to be done with government and with the private sector. The issues around the affordability of new funding systems for students has to be galvanized through partnerships and so on. So just this idea that the one thing we learned with COVID-19, that the only way we were able to make some progress towards completing the academic year this year was through these through galvanizing strong partnerships. And I think that for me, those three threads, if you like, just understanding the need for a social justice rubric. Secondly, the issue around really galvanizing the use of technology for improving the quality of higher education, but also about kind of improving the quality of life of people. And then thirdly, the issue of strategic partnerships. Now, I think that when I think about the 2015 to 2017 year period, what comes to mind is that, I had very, very much the feeling that the social compact that was developed in 1995 to 1997 around the National Commission on Higher Education, my view is that social compact has really broken down, and that there's a need for a new social compact, between higher education and society, and it seems to me that that's the way we have to go. Now, that's not something that USAc can do by itself or HELM, but that's something that I think we have to put on the table for perhaps another kind of National Commission on Higher Education or something like that galvanizes a new social compact between higher education and society. And then finally, let me make one last point, and that is that I think Professor Mohammed Bai's comment is a critical one, just this idea that we have to be saying to government, I mean, I think we were all shocked by this idea that that more than R1 billion was taken out of the higher education budget this year to satisfy the kind of the bailout of the SAA. I mean, that's we're all shocked by that. The question is, we should really be posing to government, to industry, to communities, and so on. We should really be posing to them this challenge. Is just to say, do we or do we not need universities? And if we need universities, then let's make sure that they are properly funded and so on, so that they can do what they have to do. And I think that that's something also on the table for us. And of course, it's tied into my first point, which was that we need to think about the issue of relationships between higher education and society more generally. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Bao. I think to tie this all up, I mean, since this was a summit around education, leadership, and management, just your short sort of views, brief response, Professor Fitzgerald and Professor Bao, on what does this mean for HELM going forward? Just some sort of perspectives on that can give us some direction into the future for leadership and management development. Professor Fitzgerald? Well,
thank you, Oliver. I wasn't prepared for another round, but just since you've facilitated one, what I was reflecting on when Professor Bao was speaking is that, and he brought this out with the billion taken out of the budget, that the economic destiny and fate of the South African universities is tied, is dependent on, is connected to the overall economic destiny, management, and fate of the broader society. And yet, the universities need to keep themselves properly equipped, resourced, resilient, and sustainable. Whatever that fate is, they need to, in some way, manage themselves to sufficiently rise above it. Likewise, the society, the social fate of the universities is tied to events in the greater society. Gender-based, whether it's gender-based violence, whether it's a question of trying to give students access and success who may not have a proper place to sleep or enough to eat, and yet they need to learn and succeed. And yet, although it's not the fault of the universities have to manage that and find solutions. And last, but certainly not least, from the perspective of the question you asked, the governance and management and institutional effectiveness of the universities is tied to the general culture of governance and management and institutions in the country more broadly. And yet it's ironical. And in another life, in another hat, my field is in public management. Universities, although there's some notable examples of breakdown and governance and administrative failure, are actually quite high in the league of well-managed public institutions in comparison to the public sector generally, which currently is beset by failure, by mismanagement, to a large degree by corruption and by wastage of public monies. I'm not saying the universities haven't wasted some or used some public resources less optimally. But again, universities within this landscape of public organizations, governance, management for effectiveness, have a duty to lead. And if other parts of the public sector are ineffectively or badly managed, badly governed, universities have a responsibility and a duty to be well governed, to use their resources optimally, to actually show the way. And in terms of what USAf, but specifically HELM, can do in terms of its mission, in terms of programmatic development, acceleration of those requisite governance, leadership, management approaches, skills, knowledge, professional development, then I think HELM must do that to the best lights it can manage, informed by many of the key issues, key insights that have been expressed during the summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pashul. Professor Bauer?
Thanks again, Oliver. Oliver. Professor Zeleza in his talk gave us a menu of the kind of the skills that are required, and I think that he's so right. I mean, none of us is kind of born to be a kind of a manager or a leader and so on. I mean, like you take on these tasks, and you learn as you go along. So I'd like to raise 3 points, really. I mean, the one is just this idea that there's a whole range of skill sets that are required to be picked up and so on. And I think that we really need to kind of package those and make them available to people throughout the sector, not just at the vice chancellor level and so on, but throughout the sector. Just this idea that that there's a skill set that's required to manage and so on. And some of them, by the way, are not necessarily easily taught, because they're also about attitudes and so on. So it's also about bringing that kind of influence to the thinking and to thinking. So, secondly, it's just to focus on a little bit on that first day's discussion around complexity. I mean, Professor Fitzgerald raised the issue around governance and, but it seems to me that really we have to begin to unpack for people the complexity of universities and the complexity of universities in society and so on. That and to really and to build the skills of people again across the system to try and understand how to manage this deep complexity, and in particular, kind of the non-linearity and other kind of influences that impact on being a leader and a manager at university. And thirdly, perhaps most importantly, I would say is again something that was raised by Professor Zeleza, but we go back to kind of Peter Senge and others, this idea of continuously learning and continuously having broad-based learning within institutions. So that is something else, and having this done in a systemic way. So it's not a systematic way. It's not it's not just simply about saying, can we let's get everybody to take courses. That's one approach. It's also about saying, how do you build the capacity of institutions to provide for ongoing learning in the system. And then finally, the point that was raised again by Professor Zeleza, but also raised by others in all the sessions we have, is this issue of humility, of being able to listen, being able to having empathy and so on. Of course, that's all tied back into the idea of developing a social justice rubric, because it's one thing saying the university is a social justice kind of approach to things. It's something else saying, what kind of leadership is required for the institution then to translate that into real outcomes for the society as a whole. So on the one hand, there are these really sharp technical needs. We really can't possibly have leaders at universities who don't have kind of financial acuity. That would be very dangerous. On the other hand, it's the issues around complexity and personal attitudes and so on. So I think there's a lot to learn from what's happened over the last 3 days, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Bauer and Professor Fitzgerald. I think, colleagues, sadly, we've come to the end of our summit. Just some announcements around the availability of resources and recordings that will be available from Monday for about a month on the Event Mobi platform. So you will be able to access all the presentations, the recordings of this event, and we will also include on the Event Mobi platform an evaluation form that we would kindly request you complete and submit online to us. We'll also make available the report of the summit via Event Mobi before the end of this year, before we close the office. I think the important thing for me at this point is really just to express my sincere and deepest gratitude for all those who were involved in the organizing and the delivery of this fantastic, dynamic, exciting event. Let me start by thanking our Minister, Honorable Bladen Nzimande, for his leadership. I think Minister really set the tone and really just put us all in the right space and place for this fantastic engagement we've had over the last 2.5 days. Then, of course, also the leadership of our chair, the USAf board, Professor Sibongile Mutwa, with her insights and sharing of her lessons on leadership and experiences. We really appreciate that. Special word of thanks to Professor Ahmed Bauer, our CEO. I think many of us within USAf cannot do the things that we do without him enabling and empowering us. So we really appreciate the support that you provide, Professor Bauer, not just to USAf, but also to the entire education sector. A special thank you to Dr. Diane Parker, who's really one of our stalwarts in the education sector and has been an ardent supporter of HELM since the beginning. My colleague, Dr. Linda Meyer, and also our colleague, Dr. Whitney Green, who's been very instrumental in supporting the HELM program, in particular, this initiative with the UCDP funding. Then just a special mention to the program leader, in particular, Dr. Bernadette Johnson, who did a sterling job in the way we organized and structured this program, the engagement that we had, and all the other members of the team, Professor Denise Zinn, Professor Martin Oosthuizen, who was one of our hosts, our facilitators and discussants, in particular, our international guests, the 3 guests we had today in our panel were fantastic, and we really thank you. And those who joined us from across the seas, from the US, from the UK, and from Sweden. To the HELM support team, I'd like to really express my deepest appreciation to all of you for the hard work we've done in making this event a successful one. And finally, to all the 351 delegates who signed up for this event, we knew it was going to be a big task and a big ask for you to be here and to stay engaged with us over 2.5 days at a very difficult time. But we felt it was the time really for us, before we all go away on a break and reflect on what's happened in this past year and rejuvenate and prepare ourselves and reinvigorate ourselves for the new year, to do this, have this kind of reflection and conversation at this time. We really hope you enjoyed the time you spent with us at the summit, and we look forward to engaging with you in the future. Take care of yourself and your families, and be safe over the festive season. Thank you and goodbye.
But you know what you're here for. Close your eyes lay yourself beside me. Hold tight for this ride. We don't need no protection. Come along, we don't need attention. Open your hand, take a glass. Don't be scared, I'm right here. Even though you don't know, trust me, boy. You wanna be high, boy. Take a glass, don't be scared. I'm right here, even though you don't know. Trust me, boy. You wanna be high, boy. Take it off, you want it off. 'Cause I know